Welcome to the Wellness Empowerment Project. I'm Trish.
And I'm Julie. We are two nurses exploring holistic healing and wellness practices to empower you to be the leader of your own health.
Join us as we have fun making the weird shit a normal part of your everyday life.
Welcome to the Wellness Empowerment Project. This is Julie.
And this is Trish.
And we are here with you on the, I don't even know, I have a good word, the precipice of 2025, and wanted to share with all of you what our top wellness recommendations are for a healthy and fantastic new year.
Yeah, we've been doing this for a little over a year at this point, not too much longer. But we thought this would be a great time for us to look back over the last 18 months maybe and share with you some of the themes that we've noticed and what we'd say are the top wellness hacks.
Yes. What our takeaways are after many conversations with really amazing people and ways that we are starting to implement these practices in our own lives and hope that you are as well.
Okay, Julie, I want you to start.
You want me to start?
I want you to
Okay.
start. What was the first one that comes to your mind?
When we actually were sitting here and prepping for this episode, the very first thing that came into my mind was to trust yourself, trust your intuition. That has been such a common theme in so many of our conversations that it's like on repeat.
Oh,
with-
100%. Yeah. And
Yeah.
it sounds like it's repetitive, but I feel like it may come across that way because it's connected to so many different areas of our life. We're really connected to every aspect of our life. I decided to go back and I was like, let me just look. What is the definition of intuition? Because we like setting up a baseline here with Mr. Webster. They describe intuition as the ability to understand or know something immediately without conscious reasoning. A gut feeling or inner knowing that guides decisions and action even in the absence of concrete evidence or logical analysis. When I look at that definition, the first thing that comes to my mind is, wow, we are such in a society where we prioritize and really hold dear a logical analysis and a concrete thinking. Even in school, right? Explain why, explain your thought process, explain how you came to that conclusion. I think that's something that we've been taught to do most of our lives. And now coming back to the fact of, okay, but your intuition is actually this knowing, trusting, understanding of something almost immediately. You don't necessarily have this analysis of reasoning before you come to that conclusion. You've actually come to the conclusion first.
Yeah, I was thinking also that our lifestyles have become so based on output, proof of what you're doing, that we've become so disconnected from our self, our physical self, our spiritual self, that when that gut feeling comes to you, it's almost like your first tendency is to dismiss it because you need the data, you need the information, the reasoning, like you were saying, to back up your decision.
I really love how you put that. And it even reminded me of a time where I walked into a situation and I knew something was off. I knew something was wrong. I knew it. It felt it in my whole entire body. But because I couldn't communicate clearly what it was, and because I didn't have hard evidence, I refused to leave the situation. Long story short, I should have left when I did. But because our society is not really in line, or our lifestyles are not in line with trusting our intuition, we almost don't know how. We don't trust ourselves to take the action our intuition is telling us. In reality, a lot of it is intuition is our body and our mind's way of signaling whether something is aligned for us or something isn't aligned for us. But yeah, it could be that gut feeling or this we talked about before, the hell yes. But it also, when you're misaligned, that's when you're starting to second guess yourself, like what I did in my own situation. And when you start second guessing yourself and you don't take action when you're getting this information from your body and even your mind that was not right, you basically dissolve your own self-trust. Because just like any relationship, If you're not spending the time and you're not listening and hearing the other person, if you're not listening and hearing what your body's telling you, you've dissolved that self-trust, which ultimately is going to lead in more anxiety, more burnout, more fatigue, because you're basically repeating patterns and making unaligned choices.
Yeah. And I think that a good way to start is with some really small moments in your life to start to build that self trust back up again. We've talked about even when your body's signaling you for something basic, I'm hungry, or I have to use the bathroom, or I am really tired and I want to go to sleep, to honor it, to honor those signals that your body is giving to you so that when bigger events happen, like when you walk into a situation and your body starts signaling you with that gut feeling of, I need to get, I need to get out of here, that you already have practiced listening to those signals and honoring them and following them.
That reminds me of one of the earlier conversations and episodes we had with Ashley Dufresne. She actually came on twice. One of the things we talked about were establishing rituals. I remember distinctly her saying, a ritual is defined as increasing your frequency. This is a quote she said. Rituals are powerful acts that support us in creating sustainable change versus ceremonies that mark transitions, but rituals actually create the change. If I start to look at it from that perspective, building that trust within our body and ourselves can start by establishing a small ritual that you do for yourself. If we're doing it on the sense of increasing our frequency, I think some examples were doing anything that shows some compassion for yourself. Anything that kind of is shifting your emotions. I know for me, a big thing has always been something that is shifting and working with my own nervous system. And what always grounded me in this, and I say grounded because I think a lot of us at first, it sounds like hokey, right? Like, how do I build trust? What does this even look like? But when you take it from the nervous system perspective, our autonomic nervous system, our brain is connected to our gut. Our biggest nerve hits every single organ in our body. And there is an actual gut brain connection. They call it the enteric nervous system. And that's why the gut is the second brain. When you think of it from that perspective, there's a reason why we've always had those terms gut feeling. It wasn't just because some people have this random feeling. It's literally how our body is communicating to us. It's just, are we creating an environment so we're actually able to start to hear what our body is saying?
That kind of brings me to another recommendation about the nervous system. You really need to find and develop a practice to regulate your nervous system because it does not just come naturally. As much as I really want it to, I really want it to just happen and that I don't have to actually train my brain. But
And your
what I,
body.
and your body, one thing that I have definitely learned this past year-ish is need a practice. It doesn't have to be hours, but it does need to be consistent.
The reality is a lot of us have been living in stress and anxiety, whether it's the fight and the flight response that you've been living in, or you've moved yourself and you're now in this burnout state, or you're like living in disassociation, which I know many people are, where they're just disconnected from their mind and their body. If you start to implement the right practice for the right state that you're in, you can shift and bring yourself back into regulation. It may take 6 to 8 weeks or so to actually of consistent practice to move yourself and shift yourself there, but our bodies and our brains are able to change, but we need to create the conditions in the environment for it to do.
100% agree with that. The other component of that is there are so many different types of practices out there that you can explore and identify which one is for you because you found Kundalini yoga and that was, it just rung true for you on how to get yourself back into a state of regulation. Whereas for me, I have found that emotional freedom technique or EFT tapping, that seems to be something that I just align with.
Yeah, and I've done EFT before, and it's never really, for lack of a better word, made a big shift for me. Now, I will say, looking back at my own journey, I was just doing tons of Kundalini yoga because I didn't know
Mhm.
what the heck I was doing. I just knew that for a brief moment in time, I felt regulated and I didn't know what that was, but I knew that's what I was looking for. But looking back, now I know the importance of learning what these different states feel like in our body and what aligns best with us. Because I will tell you, what I did then versus what I know now are not the same things. I probably would definitely be more focused on using specific techniques that were for me when I was living in maybe the sympathetic state, but truthfully, a lot of the times I was in the burnout state too. I probably would have shifted things a little bit, and I likely would have moved myself back into regulation a lot quicker if I had that specificity integrated. The other thing is too, you just said we have to find what works for us. And a lot of these practices, nervous system regulation practices in general, you don't need to take a lot of time. You could even just let's explore the breathing techniques. Couple minutes, 1 to 3 minutes a day. What is that shift? Maybe it is more vibration and sound and mantra. Maybe it is something that's a little more of a physical practice. And even noticing like how you're sitting all day long. I had a client that brought herself back into regulation, felt herself really needing to do a big practice at the end of the day, even after aligning in the morning. And what we found out is that she was sitting in her chair completely hunched over all day long. When you're doing that, you're communicating to your body that you don't feel safe. Even something as simple as you may get yourself in with your practice, you get yourself in alignment, but what are we doing all day long? Are we standing up straight and communicating safety with our body? Or are we completely hunched over and basically communicating that we're ready to hide and run away?
I love that. It makes me think about what I do throughout the day because my job has become primarily a desk job. I have a standing desk. I will, throughout the day, and I think because I have a window in my office, like right in front of my desk, that they turn around, people walk by, and I'm like standing up, and then I'm sitting down. I'm standing up, like all throughout the day. But those micro breaks are really important in how you are, what your posture's like. It's not necessarily just what your brain is signaling to your body, but it's what your body is signaling to your brain.
Our body communicates more to our brain than our brain does to our body. So we
Mhm.
spend all this time and energy, right? Trying to be like, if I can just change how my brain works and I can force everything else into action. Um, at least I feel like that's what I was trying to do. I was always trying to think my way out of something. But the reality is sometimes if that's not working, we may have to go the body approach.
Oh, yeah, for sure. I feel like that's actually easier to start from. I don't know why I have not personally thought in those terms, but it's easier for me to be moving or more physical, but I've always approached it from the cerebral.
No,
Per
I feel like that's me as well. And maybe it's because we're both nurses. So we've always been like the jobs have been physical. Even in management, I felt like our jobs were still very physical. You tried to get this time as much as you could, and that was after 5 p.m. But I did feel like a lot of times we're just running around, even though it wasn't maybe as much as it was um, when we were at the bedside per se. But yes, I feel like we're taught, right? That's what we've been taught to approach everything from a very cerebral mindset, which kind of goes back to the very beginning of why so many of us have not really learned how to listen and trust our intuition when we have to back everything up with logic and reasoning every single time. We tend to degrade the I hate to say the knee-jerk responsive, but those immediate signals that are coming from our body that's telling us what's in alignment, what's not.
I think it's important to note when your nervous system is out of regulation that you become highly reactive to the big and the small. Sometimes your intuition may not be right. And I feel like that is when, especially, you're dysregulated and you're reacting and your emotional responses are clouding some of your intuition. So your intuition is not 100%. It's not
Mhm.
always right because sometimes other stuff comes in.
And I think that's why, as you say, it goes back to we really integrating a nervous system regulation practice. Whether you are living in stress and anxiety or you don't feel like you're living in those states, life is always going to throw you curveballs. You're always going to be experiencing something. But this nervous system regulation practices, they're in your back pocket so you know what to do and know when to pull it out and when you need it. So you could bring yourself into alignment. So you can hear what's being communicated to you in a clear fashion. Because exactly, if you're living in stress and anxiety or if you're in burnout and disassociation, you're blocking that information from being heard clearly.
I think also that when you're just going through life and you may not necessarily have major challenges or major problems that you're facing, that it's easy to think that how you're responding or how you're feeling is quote unquote normal. And what you may be commonly experiencing doesn't necessarily mean that it's normal or that it's healthy.
Such a huge point. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off because I was just
No.
like, boom.
Right? Because it's the little stuff in your day. If you're just going along, you start to just say, oh, this is normal, but it's not normal. It's just common. And you're dissociating, feeling vibrant and thriving versus existing.
I've actually think I've decided that normal just means echo chamber.
I could
And
see that.
for those of us who, or those of you who are not in a service related profession, because I feel like this happens a lot in any sort of service related profession, you end up connecting with like minded people that are in your profession and you're all experiencing a similar thing. You become accepting of the way things are. Everyone's burnt out. Everyone's stressed. Everyone's anxious. Everyone's snipping at each other because it's just part of the job, right? You're always running around. This is an expectation. Everyone is doing it. You don't realize that actually most workplaces don't have all this craziness. I remember one place that I worked, one of the HR people came from outside of a hospital. They weren't typically a human resources person that worked in other hospital facilities. And they thought all the stuff that we were dealing with was bonkers. And I'm like, really? This isn't normal in other HR departments and in other companies in the country? And they're like, no, it's not. I'm like, oh, this is how it is in healthcare. And I know that's true because I worked at least, 2 or 3 different facilities and all had those issues.
Again, what is common is not necessarily what's healthy.
And you have a choice.
Yeah.
And we think we don't have a choice because we're living in that echo chamber. And because we really do think that if we go somewhere else or we do something else, it's going to be the same. The thing is, though, you're right. If you go somewhere else, you may have the same. But that's where it gets into okay, so what is the root? What is the root cause? What is the common player? And the common player at the end of the day is you.
Yeah, that old quote, no matter where you go, there you are. Like if you keep repeating the same patterns, then you're going to be dealing with the same stuff.
Mhm.
Just different faces, different location, different time, but the same shit.
It's a self-fulfilling prophecy.
Right. That kind of
Which
brings me to,
really oh, go ahead.
I was going to say, that kind of brings me to the next recommendation that comes to my mind is that you got to deal with your shit. You got to process your emotions.
You do. And there's a lot of different ways we can do that. Because I feel like when people throw out the term process your emotions, I'm not the type that sits and cries. I feel like that's the first thing that comes to mind. Someone who's overly emotional and crying all the time. But that's really not it, too. I think the first thing is being honest about what our emotions even are to begin with. And I'll be the first one to say, if you're living in dysregulation, and I know this because I did for a very long time, which I've been very open about, you shut down your feelings. So you don't know what you're feeling because you're just not dealing with them at all. But you do have them, they do exist, they are there.
Yeah. And emotions are, I think of emotions as, okay, this is information. This is information on how you are responding to a situation or an event or person and how that may align or not align with your values, your expectations. People tend to get really either overloaded and over no, that's not the right word. They become all about the emotion and they just ride the emotion a freight train. And then the other perspective is that they just completely avoid it. I'm not doing that. I'm not getting involved with that. I don't have time for that. And so it gets shoved down, pushed out. And then the other one is like the wailing, the
All over the
crying,
place. Yes.
drama, which in my mind is that overreaction, nervous system dysregulation person.
They both are. At the
They
end of the
both
day, they
are.
both are. And that's what I think is fascinating is that it just shows us how much our mind and our body and our feelings and our emotions are all interconnected. We talked about the nervous system and we also talked about rituals, which can increase and change our frequency. Part of nervous system dysregulation is sometimes certain emotions, and emotions are frequency. It reminds me of the emotion code conversations that we had. Different way of clearing and dealing with emotions than what we've typically talked about and heard about. We've done a lot with what we can do working with our body and how it can change what we're projecting. But the emotion code was almost like a different approach. It's okay, we're projecting this frequency, this emotion. What can we do to clear it so it doesn't keep circling back, not just into your body, but then you don't continue to project that out?
Yeah, I found that completely fascinating with looking at emotions as having different energetic frequencies and how they can become trapped in different areas of your body and manifest into physical symptoms, behavioral symptoms that when you are ready to move that out, your subconscious is saying, let's go. We just have to figure out what it is and then move it out. I love that because it's so simple. But at the same time, people really struggle with identifying what their emotions actually are. That identification of, okay, right now I'm feeling really frustrated versus I'm overwhelmed. It's if you can't quite figure out what it is, then it's really hard to move it out.
I think what rings true right there is that at the end of the day, there's no one stop, quick, take a pill, do this one practice, do this one thing, pay this money, get this one thing done, and everything's better. You could do as much emotion code that you want. But if you have not learned what the anger or the frustration feels like in your body, and you haven't learned how you can manage and work through that, you're still going to be ending up in the same place that you were at the end of the day.
Yeah, people always want the quick fix, but it's like you are having emotions every day, all day long. Clearing out the big stuff makes way for your body to heal itself, to thrive in a different way. I think that it also, and this is just my own experience, helps you learn how to your regular emotions on the daily. It
Oh,
just
100%.
frees you up.
I would completely agree. Even from one of my own experiences that once I regulated myself, of course, did I experience anxiety again? Sure, I did. But I could tell you there were maybe 2 or 3 events that I've had where I've experienced anxiety since I've brought myself into a regulated state. And every time I experienced it, I've now learned a different or a more streamlined way of how to deal with it. The first time it was like, oh, this is what anxiety actually feels like in my body because before I lived in it. So actually coming out and coming back in was this whole different experience. And then I know it sounds funny, right? Me saying it, but it is because I never experienced it in its isolated state when you were living in it for so long. Then it was like, okay, how am I actually working through this? And I remember even telling myself, like, okay, these are all the reasons why everything is fine. I shouldn't be worried. And I'm like, okay, so the top down approach isn't working. Now I have to get into my body and I had to work with my body to change and hope shift myself out. Then at the same time, actually knowing and trusting that the solution would come through. And did it all happen quickly? No, the whole process maybe took to get the situation resolved was like maybe 2 or 3 weeks. But as opposed to those 2 to 3 weeks being like maddening and me freaking out and wanting to control everything and keep harping on people for answers and just having it like encompass my whole world, it was something I was able to experience, I dealt with, I made a decision and I moved on.
I don't think people realize that lifelong habits, and when I say habits, I mean like emotional habits or even like ways of thinking can follow a certain pattern. When you've developed those habits over years and years, it's not a quick fix. It's not like you can start to feel better pretty quickly with one practice, but to sustain it or to be able to hit those speed bumps in your life, which we're all going to keep hitting speed bumps. Sometimes we're going to fall off a cliff. Having that resilience and that practice makes a huge difference. I think that how you talked about how you handled certain situations now versus how you would have handled it 10 years ago, it's subtle, but that's life.
Yeah, and that's the big point I feel like you made though is that although what you said was really important, but what you really said was that you've established this resiliency and that is a nervous system state. It's not an established nervous system state, but I feel like that ventral connection that we have with ourselves, that connection, that safety, the more that we return and the more we get into that state, we increase the capacity that we have to deal with stress and changes in our life. And that is what resilience is. It's not the ability to take a beating on the daily. It's not the ability to stay in a long-term toxic environment or relationship. It is being able to handle those swings in life. But at the end of the day, even having a large capacity and having that resiliency, you're going to get something that's still going to knock your socks off a little bit. We do all have a nervous system state that could be tied to a pattern of responding, an emotion that continue to happen that we tend to fall back into. We all experience all of those nervous system states, but we do have one that's like our fallback, the one that we continuously go to because that's the one that we're the most comfortable in. That's the one that you are maybe living in or going through in a really long time.
Yeah, I love that. I love the word capacity when it comes to resilience. I feel like we went through this period of time, particularly around the pandemic, where all the buzzwords were all around building resilience. And
Even
it,
before, I feel like that was a big buzzword. I don't know.
yeah,
I even feel like everyone talked about you have to build more resilience, and we're like, but we're all exhausted.
yeah. And in my mind, being resilient is like the ability to bounce back. Like,
Yep. Yeah, the ability to keep
something
going and to keep up
something
with
hits you.
everybody else.
Yeah,
Yep.
something hits you and you don't even flinch, or you flinch, but that's it. You're not knocked down. But capacity just feels different to me. Okay, what can I withstand? How can I expand myself in a way that I can handle more in the way that I want to
Yeah.
and show up in the world and in my relationships the way that I want to?
Yeah, and I feel I usually use the word capacity because it more aligned when we're talking about the nervous system, but capacity is resilience, and I think that we may align with it better because I think we bastardize the word resilience in the workplace. Like you said, you felt like it was resilience was the ability to keep bouncing back. And that was a nicer way of my perception of the ability to keep taking a beating.
Exactly.
But it's true, right? I think that's why everyone kept feeling or so many people feel, oh, we just have to keep building resilience. It puts it all back on you. And yes, it is all you. But there's also a kind of a point in time where it's I have to own my piece of this and I can do my piece. But you also need to look and reflect is the environment that I'm in supporting me?
Yeah, and I think that there are so many ways to expand your capacity, and some of them are based around nervous system work, but other things are a lot more basic. Can we talk about sleep?
I
Can
was
we
just
talk
gonna
about
say
food?
simple. It's simple, but it's not easy. And we so many times forget those basics. Yeah, sleep, man. Oof. I used to not get a lot of sleep. Now I'm a big fan.
I don't think that we ever really understood why sleep is so critical to your health and how to actually develop good sleep.
And let's face it, we're in professions where you are on call, working day shift, night shift, Sometimes you're rotating shifts. And even in management, we're on call 24/7. So there's really never this time of relaxation, we'll say, that you feel like you're truly in the clear. But I think that when we're in those professions where you basically had to shut down your sleep wake cycle, especially when you're doing rotating shifts, especially when you're working night shift or you're working super late or you come home and then you get a call and you're suddenly supposed to relax enough to go back to sleep again. Again, we've been taught to essentially ignore our body functions and what it's asking for us.
I think that unless you really are going out to try to find out how to improve your sleep, it's not something that's necessarily been taught. When you're a young child or you have young children, parents develop sleep routines for the very young. We take a bath, we use lavender soap, we get all lotioned up, we get in our snuggly jammies. We start that process at the same time every night. And then we do things like we read. You read to
Mhm.
your kid.
Not on your
You
cell
got
phone.
not on your cell phone. No screens there, hopefully. Not sure what it is like nowadays with people with Kindles, but those things worked because then the baby or the child would then settle and get into bed at the same time. And when you did have that routine for the parent,
Yeah, and about a 45-minute window, but we're all hell to break loose.
right, or the kid would be up in the middle of the night or they would get so
But you
overstimulated
started
they
that
couldn't
routine like an
sleep.
hour beforehand.
Yeah, and you
And
started it early.
And I gotta and I'll be blatantly honest here. When I was, not my best self, I would just go straight to bed, and I'd be lying there like, "Why can't I shut my brain off? Why can't I sleep?" I didn't really think. I'd be like, I'd go to bed early, but I wasn't necessarily having a routine that was putting my body and my mind in a relaxed state.
Somewhere along the way, that routine stopped. If you think back to your own self coming up, when you stopped doing all of those same things every evening to wind down and slow down, I think of that in terms of myself, but I also think about that in terms of my own kids. There was a point where it was like, okay, practice, come home, everybody shovel food in your face, get the
On to the
homework
next
done.
thing.
We're trying to clean up. Let's do some laundry because we have another game tomorrow. We need to wash the uniform or whatever it might be. Like somewhere along the way, we abandoned having a nighttime routine. And then that just continues on as you move into adulthood that you don't have a nighttime routine to slow yourself down, wind yourself down. And we're also not consistent. Go to bed willy-nilly.
I just wanna share a quote from Kathy when we talked about sleep on our
Mhm.
podcast. I just thought this was pretty on point. Sometimes we're on call, and so we do have to respond. But I really encourage people to think, what do we actually need to have to theirs be going to an emergency if I don't respond in the middle of the night and limit the things that we will need to respond to? Because with the Industrial Revolution, people started being treated like machines. We're not machines. We deserve rest. And really that was the main point right there. Since the Industrial Revolution, people started to be treated like machines and we're not machines. We deserve rest.
I love that when she said that we deserve rest,
Yeah.
that we're not machines. Like
Huge.
that
How much
definitely.
and we've started to treat our own bodies like we're just machines.
It's like this crazy loop. We have technology that we can reach out and we can get in touch with somebody at any point at any time. And there now is a level of expectation of response. If people start, I just posted this on my story on Instagram. If you are texting me after a certain time of night, I'm going to respond at probably 5 o'clock in the
Oh, yeah.
morning.
I have my phone go in like a silent mode at 8:15 every single evening, not just Monday through Friday, Saturday and Sundays as well. I get no notifications. Maybe I'm on my phone after that time, possibly, but I'm not gonna get a notification of it. And yes, you may hear from me again when I wake up, maybe at 5 AM, because we're
Yes.
early risers here.
But it's like people are so dysregulated and their sleep is so whacked out that they'll send things in the middle of the night, which then disrupts other people's. I am also intentional with my phone has a sleep focus, and only certain people can break through the sleep focus because I have college age kids. But sometimes they're also not respectful of like, when you're texting me at 1 o'clock in the morning, it better be because I need to get you out of jail.
Yeah.
You're
I was
in the
just gonna say that.
emergency
I'm
room,
like,
not something else. Hey, bro, which I'm getting a little bit too much of lately, but not you, bro. But I think that sleep, if you find that nighttime routine and you are consistent with when you go to sleep and when you wake up, that in itself is so healing and extends that capacity that we've been talking about. So simple.
that's where our body starts to heal. It needs to be in that restful state. Yes, nervous system wise, our parasympathetic, rest and digest. But that's also where healing occurs. And that's why we also need our sleep.
Mhm. Same thing with food. Food is medicine. Food is information to your body. Our body, we are natural beings. And when we put things into our body that are not natural, we go haywire.
I think that we had a great conversation with Madeline. Food is medicine. Highly suggest people go back and listen to that. A big piece of that too is us realizing that just because the food is on the shelf doesn't mean it's healthy for us to take. We really need to look at our food with a different perspective and a different eye. Just as food can heal us as medicine, it can also help cause disease as well, especially those highly processed foods.
Those highly processed foods impacts our emotional state. It impacts how we think or not think very clearly, way more than we would like it to. The convenience of processed foods is it's very seductive.
I think it goes back, right, to the fact of we're not machines. It really goes into, okay, how can we be more productive, right? Don't get a lot of sleep, work, work, work to the point where you're just in completely dysregulated state, throw this crap food in your body because it's easy and convenient. And unfortunately, we can't always prioritize convenience. Sometimes we have to, but when it becomes an integral part of our life and a mainstay of our life, we're going to start hurting ourselves in more ways than we realize.
And your body is going to, at some point, make you stop and slow down because disease states will come in and it's going to force you to slow down. It's going to force you down a different path.
Because if you don't listen to your body and you don't give it what it needs, it's going to force it upon you in a way you're probably not going to, or when it's a lot worse. Because the
Well,
reality is what we're able to maintain and our body can handle when we're younger, we just can't handle the same things over time. It builds up in our body over time. So we can't handle it over time. But then we also have the fact that our bodies are constantly changing.
I was just thinking the same thing that you have to learn and change and adapt with each stage of your life, especially as you age, what your body was able to handle, you may no longer be able to do that as you get older. Some of that is that you may have built things up in your system over years and years, but your body's also changing and you have to adapt to those changes. We've had several conversations about women's health and perimenopause and that big change. What we're seeing is that actually those changes start happening much earlier than we want it to in our mid 30s.
Much earlier than we want to admit.
Yes. And I think that the common language is, wow, when you hit 30, you feel it. And you feel it again when you hit 40. And when you hit 50, like every decade, it feels like a big whack. But it doesn't necessarily have to be. But we do need to learn and understand how to ride the changes of your body and how to mitigate those symptoms, even if at first you don't realize that those symptoms are actually symptoms.
And this kind of goes back to something we talked about earlier. Just because it's normal Doesn't mean it's healthy, doesn't mean it's optimal. I think we've normalized a lot of these PMS symptoms or the hormonal changes as, oh, yeah, this is just what happens. Everyone goes through this. The reality is that, no, you don't have to live with all these hormone fluxes. You don't have to live with this pain and these cramps and that. Really, it's your body communicating to you that there's things that we may need to adjust and change over time. Could be our food, our diet, our exercise, all the above,
All the above.
all the
Yeah.
above.
Yes. Just because you have horrible cramps around your period, that's common, but doesn't necessarily mean that you have zero control over that happening to you.
Exactly. And sometimes just popping the pill isn't necessarily, it's just masking the symptom. It's masking the problem. It's not actually healing it. That's a really a big thing too. And I know we've been chatting for a while now, but I think that's really the biggest piece is let's look at all the ways that we have been putting band-aids on or shutting down symptoms and how that has enabled us not to get to the root cause. And yeah, sometimes it's popping the pills so you don't have the pain or you don't have the tension or you don't have this or that, but it's masking your ability to get to, okay, the root of it and what your body really needs and what your body is really for. It also could be the fact of when you're ignoring your sleep and you take the caffeine drink so you can keep going. And again, you're ignoring what your body really needs when we have to get up early again. We look at it from that perspective, it can be very eye-opening because we haven't been healing ourselves. We've just been silencing the symptoms.
And I think it's a good way to walk into a new year when so many resolutions are made. Everyone gets hyped up, and even because I love New Year's. I love New Year's Eve. It's one of my favorite holidays. I feel like, yeah, it's a new beginning. I get revved up, but making small changes compounds over time. If your priority for the new year is around health and improving your health in whatever way that may mean, making some of these small changes over time will expand your capacity and improve your overall life. Just my opinion.
So, guys, feel free to share with us. Send us an email and let us know what are some of your health goals for 2025. Mental, physical, emotional, spiritual. We'd love to hear all about them. And I know that they're going to be part of my goals for this coming year as well.
Mine too. All right. It was a great conversation. Hope everybody has a wonderful, safe, and healthy new year.
See you in 2025.
Thanks for joining. If you enjoyed this episode, please follow, subscribe, and share with a friend.
Want to learn more about a specific topic? Follow and drop us a line on Instagram so we can explore it more with you.